For the very first time, victims of America's opioid crisis got a chance to formally confront the Sackler family. They own Purdue Pharma. The company makes the highly addictive painkiller OxyContin.
Let me introduce you to Ligadone.
The Sackler family has not faced any criminal charges. They pleaded guilty in federal court to multiple felonies.
For defrauding the United States and violating the anti-kickback statute from 2009 to 2017.
And the Sacklers are right. This is an important point for us to make clear for you to understand. The Sacklers have not been charged with any crimes.
People may try, but you will never, ever get convicted of a single crime.
To pay up to $6 billion in exchange for immunity against future opioid lawsuits.
A highly addictive drug, often a deadly drug.
And $750 million of it to the victims or survivors. Money won't bring back their dead loved ones.
Hello fellow horror fans, and welcome to my channel. I've got an extra spooky video for you today where we'll be diving into one of my new favorite shows, The Fall of the House of Usher. Now, over the course of researching this video, I found that the rabbit hole of this family goes so deep, even I can't grasp the full extent of it. And I'm pretty sure I uncovered an entire conspiracy about a couple of family members, but more on that later. Now, everyone is aware that this show was, in a way, Mike Flanagan's love story to Edgar Allan Poe, from The Telltale Heart,
I'm so sorry.
to The Black Cat,
They're predators because they're efficient.
to the show's very namesake story. These masterly crafted, if a bit on the nose references, have been beautifully adapted to reflect our modern reality. But where did all this drug stuff come from? Now, if you haven't been following the opioid crisis in America and globally, I don't blame you.
84,000 people just last year. Just in the US. That's just a guess. It's impossible to know the real numbers. 941,878 since 1985. Again, just the US. Again, just a guess. But we know better, don't we? Millions, Roderick. Millions. And that's just the deaths. Who knows how many more are addicted, ruined. Your tally is fucking impressive.
The discovery that 600,000 Americans and millions more overseas have passed as a result of these drugs isn't typically a topic you stumble into, but the masterful way that Mike Flanagan weaved elements of this real-life horror between the context of Poe's stories, it's remarkable once you dive into it. Purdue Frederick was a pharma company founded by John Purdue Gray. It was sold to Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond Sackler in 1952. You may not know Purdue, but you've certainly heard of some of their products. These guys were slinging all of the opioids: hydromorphone, fentanyl, codeine, hydrocodone, and oxycodone, also known as OxyContin. I had no idea about this company. And I myself was prescribed these drugs when I got my wisdom teeth out, and I have also known people that were lost to them. The biggest sin the company is accused of isn't just the production of the drug, but their hefty marketing campaign that followed. These ads marketed the drug as the best alternative pain medication, with the ability to last longer, in higher doses, and with a vanishingly low addiction rate.
Don't be afraid to take what they give you. Often, it will be an opioid medication. Some patients may be afraid of taking opioids because they're perceived as too strong or addictive. But that is far from actual fact. Less than 1% of patients taking opioids actually become addicted.
They marketed this directly to physicians as well, convincing doctors that Oxy should be prescribed more often in places where opioids would typically not have a place. When they were exposed in 2017, the CEO jotted down a list of what caused the opioid crisis. There are too many RXs being written, too high of a dose, for too long, for conditions that often don't require them, by doctors who lack the requisite training of how to use them appropriately.
Good job, Raymond. That's a very good job there. Did you guys hear that?
It sounds like a call's coming from inside my house. I know you have experience with that, Raymond.
What do I do now, Raymond?
Obviously, names and faces aren't reflected in the show.
Just look at his name. Frederick is about as close to Roderick as you get without a junior. I don't know why I didn't just call him Froderick.
Well, unless your name is Madeline, as the names in the Usher family are a reflection of Poe's materials. However, the comparisons are there again and again, but none quite so striking as the founders of the family, Madeline and Roderick. Of the three leading brothers, Arthur was widely considered to be the patriarch of the family, and was the primary individual leading the family through its acquisition of Purdue Pharma and their global company, Mundi Pharma. Arthur was quite a bit like Frederick in a few ways. For example, Arthur was known for his collections from the ancient world, including the largest Chinese artifact collection in the world, which did end up getting donated. His wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art is an Egyptian tomb, and he also received an Egyptian Order of Merit from the Egyptian president. Arthur was also married more than once, with his first wife giving him 2 children and seemingly being a very normal woman. His second wife, however, Marietta, was a co-owner of a German pharma company. They also had 2 children before Arthur decided to remarry to Jillian Tully. I can't find much about Jillian's age or how old she was when they got married in the 80s, but this is what she looks like today. So my assumption is she was very young at the time. Jillian is our closest representation of Juno in the show that we can find, as there are no true white lilies in the Sackler family. Jillian continues to do philanthropic work in Arthur's name to this very day. Arthur died and his children left before Purdue ever dipped their toes in Oxy, but Arthur was the grandfather of the marketing method that Purdue was criticized for, and clearly a heavy inspiration for Roderick.
This Kopesh was in someone's belly circa 2000 BCE. This go out like a warrior in ancient Egypt.
Oxycontin is the clear parallel to Ligadone, and is the drug that these brothers decided to push the heaviest with their company and face the most backlash for. To be real with you, Arthur and his brothers seemingly shared a single identity, as these 3 brothers were all doctors, all had psychiatric experience, and all went on to purchase Purdue Pharma and Mundi Pharma, not to mention the weird obsession with every ancient culture except for their own. These men are the ones that decided to pull the 1% addiction statistic from a non-peer-reviewed 4-sentence paragraph in the back of a medical journal. This letter was a letter to the editor written into the New England Journal of Medicine. If you aren't familiar with a letter to the editor, it is essentially fan mail. A bit different in the situation of being in a medical journal, but regardless, not peer-reviewed. The study was performed by Herschel Jick and his assistant, Jane Porter. They wrote the letter in reference to patients that had no history of addiction that had received narcotics while in the hospital. Of the 11,882 patients, only 4 developed reasonably well-documented addiction. They thus concluded that despite use of narcotics in hospitals, the development of addiction is rare with patients with no history of addiction. This singular study has been cited over 600 times by opioid companies. The Sackler family took this letter, boiled it down to a general population addiction rate of less than 1%, damned the entire context of these patients being non-addicts to begin with, and chose not to include the hospital setting. Even the whole forging signatures so patients understand their rights about the drug seems like a reference to Purdue.
See, a lot of these people apparently didn't sign these forms themselves. I believe some of these signatures are forged, and I believe this doctor has been enlisting some of them in studies without fully informing them or their families about possible side effects, major side effects.
So if you call up and you tell them that the patient doesn't have cancer, it's automatically denied.
So instead, what were you doing?
They would always ask, does the patient have cancer? Uh-huh. That's what we would say.
So you do, you'd say yes.
But I'm not saying yes, right? I would just say,
Isn't that a yes?
Well, that's what they did think, but I wasn't blatantly saying yes.
Oh my God!
From his narcissistic vying for godhood and riches, to his uncaring collection of cultural relics,
I reached through time and ripped the eyes out of a goddess. with my pocketbook and some patience. Does that make me a god?
The figurehead of the Usher family takes all of the worst parts of these men, and some of the good too. Like Roderick, the Sacklers started off their empire with innocent notions, being the individuals responsible for the change from electroshock therapy to medication for people with psychiatric conditions.
We all of us, know pain. It's the great equalizer. And this is the first pill in history for all of us. And this little pill is a world without pain.
But as their riches accumulated, their morality crumbled, leading them to be among the most hated men on the face of the planet. Speaking of the most hated men on the planet, chief among the most obvious references to our real world, barring the...
Like I said to one of my clients, when I'm done, you can stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and it won't cost you a thing.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
Would be the scene in which Pym shows Madeline and Roderick all the various sightings of Verna throughout the years. In a scene that feels like I'm looking at Mike Flanagan's personal shit list, some of these people are still in major positions of power to this day. The first of these pictures is her and David Koch, one of the biggest philanthropists of the right-wing movement, as well as his chemical company being one of the largest producers of greenhouse gases and water pollution in the world.
For the toxic twins. We always got along with those fucknuts.
Next up is Zucky. We all know his information stealing ways. Gina Reinhardt is an Australian billionaire that inherited her wealth in the iron ore industry from her father, destroying many ecosystems and causing climate havoc in her wake. She's recently decided to get into the lithium mining industry, which is also known to cause intense ecological damage, pollution of drinking water, and not to mention the damage to the child workers as young as 7 that work these mines. The $2 a day line from Roderick is a reference to when she proudly announced to the Australian people that they really ought to work harder, since she can outsource her labor to Africa and South America for less than $2 a day.
She tried to make a case for $2 a day. Okay, no.
Her inherited net worth is $25 billion, and here she is bragging about $2 a day. Also very ironic coming from a fucking heiress. The only version of work that you know is,
"Please, Daddy, I promise I won't give them a livable wage."
That was awful, but so is she. And also she doesn't believe in climate change, so she's just gonna keep destroying our planet to the maximum extent of what local governments will allow. I only know one Reinhardt, and he would hate your ass. Mitch McConnell is our Senate Minority Leader. He used to be more of a moderate Republican, but he's very much shifted towards conservatism and obstructionism, which the show had to have been made before the whole Mitch McConnell moment of him freezing on TV, but the idea that he saw Verna in the crowd and the reminder of his deal is what made him lose his shit makes me so fucking happy.
You're for election in 3 short years. What are your thoughts on it?
I'm sorry, I had a hard time hearing you.
That's okay. What are your thoughts on running for re-election in 2026?
What are my thoughts about what?
Running for re-election in 2026.
That's
Did you hear the question, Senator? Running for re-election in 2026? All right, I'm sorry, you all. We're going to need a minute. Senator. Benny.
We also have Brett Kavanaugh. He's one of our Supreme Court justices that voted to turn over Roe v. Wade. He also totally doesn't have any accusations of sexual misconduct or anything like that. Next up we have Larry Ellison, a 2020 election denier and privacy invader worth over $100 billion. Here we have Rupert Murdoch, the owner of Fox News, the reason that your grandma thinks the frogs are turning people gay, or was it the other way around? Ah, fuck, I don't even know. Moving on. The Getty family. Some of the most prominent oil tycoons in US history. The founders died in the 70s, and their granddaughter has been proudly using her inheritance to support climate activism. So that's some serious Lenore vibes. We have Prescott Bush, the father of George H.W. Bush, and the grandfather of George W. Bush. The Bush family have been the only family in America that have produced more than one president, and it is now public knowledge that President Bush, lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and Afghanistan in order to push US soldiers to occupy the area, which is very oil-rich.
Mr. Bush, when are you going to apologize for the million Iraqis that are dead because you lied? You lied about weapons of mass destruction. You lied about connections to 9/11. You lied about Iraq being a threat. You sent me to Iraq. You sent me to Iraq in 2003. My friends are dead. Joshua Castile. You killed people. You lied. You lied about WMD. A million Iraqis are dead because you lied.
The current death toll of these wars is estimated to be around 500,000. 500,000 people dead. That shit is fucking inconceivable. But hey, I always wondered how a man with the IQ of a banana came to be president, and then managed to get his son elected as well. And a deal with Verna is definitely a conclusion that brings me a lot of comfort. Here we have William Randolph Hearst, a newspaper mogul that's responsible for the type of media that your grandma won't stop yelling about. The sensationalist, clickbait headlines were all grandfathered by this lovely man. I know you guys have heard about the Rockefellers in one way or another. They were the oil tycoons. They were the first billionaires of America, and you can still find Chevron dotted across the west and south of the US and ExxonMobil to the east. As you can imagine, the carbon footprint that followed was immense, and nowadays the only organization with the name still attached is a philanthropic one, committed to carbon footprint reversal. Edward Doheny, another oil tycoon, but this dude is actually most well known for an event known as the Teapot Dome Scandal, one of the most prolific cases of government bribery. Essentially, these guys bribed government officials to let them lease a Navy petroleum reserve to their private oil company without any bidding and at incredibly low rates. This was the very first instance of a presidential cabinet member going to prison. The Vanderbilts were wealthy shipping, then railroad tycoons of the Gilded Age. They went on to lose much of their wealth in an event many dub the Fall of the House of Vanderbilt. Title card! Our last and earliest photograph of Verna is with John Francis Queeny, who was the founder of Monsanto Chemical Works in 1901, also dipping their toes in all things chemical, from aspirin to weed killer to Coca-Cola. They ended up facing a massive lawsuit regarding health concerns caused by their weed killer Roundup, but in spite of this was still acquired by German company Bayer's. But the lawsuit was still in progress after the acquisition took place, with Bayer's then being the ones to shoulder the $10 billion fine. That's not a level of slippery that can only be described by Verna. I don't know what is. Even the deal that Madeline and Roderick make with Verna on New Year's seems to be a reflection of our real world.
You will be the king and queen of Fortunato, your birthright. No legal consequences. Guaranteed. Be altruistic, be charitable, or don't. I just want to see what you do.
You're gonna say it costs what, our souls or whatever?
It won't even go on your tab. What if I said you get all that, the whole thing, and the price is deferred? Let the next generation foot the bill.
Seemingly a reflection of the issues that boomers created with our economic and ecological situations that younger generations now must work to reverse. Around the 70s, many members of this generation were finding themselves in positions of economic and ecological responsibility. And this era is where we begin to see the economy take a turn. While members of the boomer generation were free to live financially significant lives, their drive to continue that trend began to slowly siphon wealth from younger generations at a rate higher than those in revolutionary France. In our real world, these choices manifested as wage to productivity discrepancy and a drastic increase in global temperature. Good luck buying a house, right? Roderick and Madeline make this deal with Verna, ensuring their own financial prosperity, even if it means ensuring the generations to follow never stood a fair chance to begin with, regardless of if they deserve the fate or not. Cinematically, in this moment, we also see our clearest glimpse of how the twins play off of each other, enabling each other, making each other worse. I expected Madeline to be the one to readily agree in this scenario, but instead we see a surprising moment of doubt between the both of them, but pushing through it and agreeing nonetheless, seemingly playing off the other sibling's interest. This moment shows the dangers of insulation of thought, especially when it comes to family. If Roderick's wife had been present, I have no doubts that the deal would not have been made. But with only Roderick and Madeline, even a deal with the devil is enthusiastically accepted, as that level of moral depravity may only be displayed to one another. The only individual with a name matching real life is Madeline, which, before we get into it, likely has more to do with Poe's original House of Usher characters being Roderick and Madeline, but Mike did not shy away from comparing these two women. Madeline Sackler, heiress of the Purdue family, is a filmmaker that is currently creating a movie in which a character creates the consciousness of her father through AI to deal with the grief of his passing. She's faced scrutiny as her father passed in 2020, and many view this film as autobiographical and morally gray, considering the actions of her father surrounding OxyContin. Several of the film's crew have come out stating that it is clearly autobiographical in nature, and many members of the crew had issues with the ethics of making a film like this, even having people quit as a result. This is a direct reflection of Madeline Usher's obsession with AI. Why can't I say AI? AI immortality. A direct reflection of her obsession with AI immortality, and her belief that some consciousnesses are worthy of everlasting life, with the rational understanding that this luxury would only be afforded to individuals with the most wealth, rather than those that truly deserve it.
This isn't about building a chatbot. It's about legacy. Would take this and shove it up the nose and pick out the brains bit by bit before mummification. It is a new piece from my immortality collection, and it is beautiful, and I'm going to use it.
Got a minute?
I also wanted to briefly touch on one of her other movies, The Lottery. As I dug more into it, the more allegedly sketchy it becomes. So, in 2010, Madeline created a feature-length documentary about underprivileged kids in New York relying on a lottery into a charter school as their only shot of getting a decent education. In the film, we learn of the inequality between kids growing up in Harlem versus kids that grow up in wealthier areas. We follow along with families with a draw in this charter school lottery. In an interview, Madeline displays her clear understanding of the damaging nature of classism.
So if you're from a more affluent suburb like Westchester, or I'm from 30 minutes away from Harlem, we have access to a much better public education system than the kids do in Harlem. And that's really what I was interested in. I think that difference is, I think it's morally wrong. I really think that this is the civil rights issue of today, and it's not just about race. it's about class. And the risks of this are tremendous. I can end up going to college and choosing if I want to be a doctor or a struggling filmmaker. And kids in Harlem, many of them aren't going to have that choice because they're not going to have the skills to graduate from high school and to get through.
Billionaire family, a $3 million house with only one maid's quarters. Struggling filmmaker? You're fucking out of your mind! Okay, but one has to take pause and say she may be super rich, she's not anything like me, but at least she's doing good for the community, right? So, Madeline's father Richard founded his education organization, Achievement Now, in 2005, and his main notes of philanthropic action are donating to tax-exempt charter schools named Achievement First. These are the very charter schools that Madeline spoke about in her film, released in 2010. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, that's great. That means her dad probably got them to erect some additional locations closer to home, or maybe improve conditions in existing institutions. No, not a single Achievement First location has ever been introduced in the areas she focused on. As for the charter schools, they are classified as a nonprofit. Based off of the numbers, it looks like they are pulling in about $20 million annually in net profit. I'm not really sure how all of this works. I assume this money just goes back into the school, but one can never be sure, right? And if you have any knowledge about this, please let me know down in the comments. I'm super curious about this. But if we look at Madeline's movie as a marketing tactic, all this profit starts to make sense, right? And looking at this big profit, the millions in donations that Richard gave to them begin to make a lot less sense. To be fair, the Sackler family has always been very generous to educational institutions. It's just they only ever seem to donate to established universities, charter schools, and museums, rather than the poverty-ridden individuals that Madeline has intimate knowledge of, was invited into the homes and communities of. I don't really have anything fun to say about this point, so I'll just say that if a rich white lady is scaring you into believing that your child only has one option for a bright future, And it turns out her dad has his grubby hands all over that option. There's gotta be a better one. On the topic of Madeline, I wanted to include this as a purely cinematic note, as this moment was my personal favorite, and I'd hate to let you miss it. In their final argument, Roderick's wife's last words to Madeline were,
You are so small, Madeline.
Even throughout all of Rufus's misogyny, we never see Madeline break.
Fuck me. No, that's fine. Hell, you'll climb that ladder fast. Men have to climb that ladder on their bellies in the dirt, but women, they can climb on their backs, on their knees. The world's unfair that way, but it works.
For every line he dishes at her, she has an equally witty and demeaning quip to match. At this moment, we see a pause on her face. Not a long moment, yet the most vulnerable moment we get from a young Madeline. With a stone face and misty eyes, she makes an expedient retreat. We don't truly get to see how much this comment hurt Madeline to her core, not until later when she leverages the line against Rufus, placing a brick with a statement in front of Rufus's face as he accepts defeat. We see the hatred in her face as she places the brick, the most hurtful thing she could think of. In the wise words of Lil Uzi Vert, in reality, I'm 5'4". Stand on my money, I'm 6'6". This profound quote relates to the inflated ego and self-importance that individuals with wealth can come to feel. That even if you are physically small, riches invoke a bravado that few things can quite reach. That is until you meet someone that can see through all that. Sure, Madeline was rich, but she had no children of her own, her only form of family being a result of Roderick, and she failed both of her ultimate goals.
Okay, you're rich. You never have to work again. What now? What do you do with your life?
I never let a man have power over me, and I figure out how to live forever.
First of which she fails by living a life entirely in support of her brother. And her brother was the very individual to dole out her horrific yet symphonious demise.
You are a queen. You're a goddess. And you're gonna live forever.
The truest tragedy in the fall of the House of Usher are the horrors that we see reflected in the real world. How a generation built on pride and greed can bring about the downfall of their own future generations willingly. And despite the opportunity to bring about good, decided to go with the easiest option, continuing to push their poison to the people right up to the very moment of their demise, and baselessly absolving themselves of responsibility right up to the very end.
You don't want Ligadone, don't buy it. You don't want to get addicted, don't abuse it. They're mad because we made it available and desirable. Hey, newsflash, it's our only fucking job.
As a final note on the Sackler family, many members have unfortunately already passed. And as for their crimes, with their US company Purdue, no member of the family faced individual charges, barring a $4 billion, with varying reports, fine to the company as a whole, which isn't expected to be actually collected considering the company has filed for bankruptcy. True slap in the face, considering the company's $12 billion in profits on opioids alone was withdrawn to personal accounts prior to the lawsuit, and that money will never see the pockets of individuals devastated by the drug. But I do actually have some good news for you. The Supreme Court blocked their filing for bankruptcy and their immunity to civil suits. They cited that the purpose of the legal protection was for individuals under financial duress, not billionaires avoiding settlements. So justice may still be served, we'll just have to see. Their global company Mundi Pharma is still in operation, leading up to and following the lawsuit, as the freedom to continue to operate globally was a major piece in getting Purdue to reach the $4 billion settlement. The family maintains their innocence, saying there are many other players to blame, and if they could go back, they would not change a thing. They never mention any of those players by name, likely as a deal with other pharma companies aiming to buy their global pharma giant was on the horizon, with them reaching a deal this year with Inova to the tune of $5 billion for Mundi, which is a nice leg up to their current $15 billion family. And reminder that Inova probably sucks just as bad as them. Did you guys know that cold medicine doesn't work? This piece by Mike Flanagan captured the horrors of this family in a gut-wrenching way that I've never seen in anyone else's interpretation of the Sackler family story. If you're interested in learning more about the Sackler family, there are many great places for that. Dopesick, The Empire of Pain, John Oliver's entire opioid series. Originally, my intention with this video was to go over every member of the Usher and Sackler families to present you all of the similarities, but the conspiracies and deceit really just go too deep with this family. For example, Leo's story can be almost exactly attributed to a member of the Sackler family, whose very existence was attempted to be scrubbed. Because an addict in the family when you sell drugs is a bad look, I guess. If you're interested in knowing more about the Sackler family as they correlate to the show, please let me know down in the comments. If you like this video, please make sure to drop a like and consider subscribing. I'm just getting started out on this YouTube thing, and every like, comment, and sub really does put the biggest smile on my face every single time. And with that, I bid you a wonderful day, and adieu.